And so what I've done is I've gone through the Bible for this week and next week, and I've picked out some stories. And my goal upon you hearing these stories is for you to literally, honestly say, like, I can't believe that that is in the Bible. Because the Bible's pretty cool. The Bible's amazing. But sometimes we kind of forget that, it's got, we talk about the Bible in a way that we know it has these amazing truths. And we know it has all this, amazing good stuff in there. But also the Bible is full of some crazy things in there as well. Like there's stuff that hopefully you'll say, like, I can't believe that that is in the Bible. So we'll see if you say that at the end of this message. And today we're going to be looking at a story. And here's what the story is about. I want to give this to you up front so that you can try and connect with it as people. So the story is about how God can use unlikely people and unlikely tools in unlikely moments to break the grip of fear and bring freedom. That's what we're talking about. How God can use unlikely people and unlikely tools in unlikely moments to break the grip of fear and bring freedom over your life or over your community or over your legacy, your family. And really, isn't that kind of like all of us? Don't we all feel like unlikely people? Many of us, unless you're majorly narcissistic or something, think about ourselves in a way that's like, but I'm not the likely guy to do this. I'm not the likely person that's going to bring a change to the family, or that's going to stand up for, against somebody and, put boundaries in place or whatever it is. But we consider ourselves as like the unlikely person. This unlikely tools, we say to ourselves, like, am I qualified? Am I qualified to do this? Am I qualified to be a parent? I have a broken past. Am I qualified to be a good spouse or to be a good friend? And we spend a bunch of time disqualifying ourselves, left and right, all the time. And we look at ourselves as the unlikely people. But that's actually okay. And this morning we're going to see how God can use people like you, people like me, those of us that feel unqualified, to do an amazing thing and break fear and bring freedom. So we're going to be looking at Israel this morning. And I know everyone's like, oh, Israel, boring, It is, it can be, but we're not talking about Israel like politically, so relax. It's not going to be about that. But we're going to look at the story of Israel, and we're going to be in the book of Judges. And what we end up seeing in this is we see that Israel, let me just bring us all up on the same page here as I'm trying to filter out and think, how do we all get on the same page here? You'd think I would know that already coming into a sermon, but sometimes I'm figuring it out as we go. So Moses, we all know Moses, or many of us know Moses. Israel was held captive in Egypt. Pharaoh didn't want to let them go, and then there was the plagues, and then eventually Pharaoh let them go. And then Moses led the people out of Egypt. They wandered around in the desert and eventually in the wilderness, and eventually they came up to the edge of the promised land. And this promised land was a land that was called Canaan. All right. And in Canaan, there was the land of milk and honey, but there was also kind of the land of giants. And Moses brings them right up to the line, right up to the edge of going into the promised land. But Moses makes like a dumb mistake, like many of us do. Moses is, a little bit prideful. And there was one time where God said, strike a rock and get water. And he hits it and water comes out. And then Moses does it again because he's frustrated, but he doesn't wait on God to tell him to do it. And he does it. And he's like, well, I got water last time. So he does that. And God's like, what are you doing, man? You're taking advantage of, why aren't you paying attention to me? Why aren't you coming to me on this, Moses? And so Moses is, so anyway, God says, like, Moses, I'm not going to let you go into the promised land, which I don't know, I kind of feel like is pretty harsh. I mean, the guy got mad and hit a rock with a stick, but Moses put himself in the position of God, and God said, okay, you brought him to this far, now you're going to die before you go into the promised land. And then the Israelites were unbelieving and they were unfaithful. They were a mess in and of themselves there. So eventually Moses dies. And when Moses dies, he puts this guy named Joseph in charge. And so Joseph takes over. And what Joseph does is Joseph brings the Israelites into the promised land. He's like the finisher. You know, in baseball, there's a pitcher whose role is called the closer. So they come in at the 9th inning and they pitch just that inning, just to close the game and finish the game off. And so Joseph is kind of the closer. He's going to take Israel and actually bring them into the promised land. And that's what he does. So Joseph has this big job of bringing them into the promised land. They go on battles, they fight people, they kill people, they win, they gain land. You know, lots of amazing things are happening there. And what Joseph does specifically is Joseph is like, he's in charge of divvying up the land because there's 12 tribes. All right. So the 12 tribes of Israel are each going to get a portion of land. And Joseph is the guy that divvies that up. You know, can you imagine that? Sometimes it's hard to divvy up chicken nuggets at the dinner table, right? Because everyone's like, I want one, you know. And Joseph's got to divvy up land, you know, to these 12 tribes. So he does that. But Israel, again, they just don't listen to God all the way. It's like they almost listen to God, but then, I don't know, they don't. I don't get it. You know, they take a shortcut here. And what Israel ends up doing is they go in and they conquer all these places. And if you look at, you know, the book of Judges, what did I say? I said, what have I been saying? Joseph? Oh, I typed the wrong thing. This is Joshua. Yeah. Joshua, I was like, why does my wife holding up a piece of paper, you know? So, you know, and I was like, in my mind, I'm like, maybe I should look at that while I'm trying to preach. And then I look at it and I'm like, Joshua, but I have Joseph. Okay. Guys, this is Joshua, all right? You know, listen, you need to check your AI answers and you need to check me, all right? So anyway, so what Joshua does is, let's just finish. Let's just go have coffee and just be done with this thing here. No. Where's Gail, Sasha? You know, because Sasha's mom has corrected me as well. Okay, so anyway. All right, can we all just say Joshua on 3? 1, 2, 3. Joshua. Now we're good. All right. So Israel goes in, they conquer people, but Israel makes a big mistake. They make a big mistake. They don't eliminate everybody. Instead, Israel leaves these pockets. Put that slide up, guys. Pockets. Because see, it's a joke. I want you to see the... Yeah, pretty good, right? Pretty good. Get it? Pockets, okay? So what Israel has done is Israel goes in and they don't defeat everybody. They leave some people. And these pockets of people that are left in the land of Canaan are going to end up being a huge issue to Israel. It's actually going to have devastating consequences because God has told the people to go into Canaan and murder everybody. Babies, women, children, the dogs, the cats, everything. I know it sounds like, oh my goodness, you know, God, you're so mean, you know. But it sounds super harsh, but that's what he asked them to do because God knew that God was establishing this people group of Israel underneath a covenant that he had with them. And he knew that these people, that they didn't need to have the influence of other gods and other groups into their culture because Israel has proven over and over and over again that they can't do that they can't intermix with others. So they leave these pockets and it has devastating consequences. So much so that an angel of the Lord comes to speak to Israel. And whenever we see an angel of the Lord in the Bible, in some translations and some interpretations, that's actually God himself. Or it's an angel that is a representative of God that God is maybe speaking through. And so God comes down and talks to Israel face to face. And in Judges 2, look, watch what this angel says. Now the angel of the Lord came up from Gilgal to Bochum, 2 towns, and he said, I brought you up from Egypt, and I led you to the land which I swore to give to your fathers. And I said, and here's the covenant with Israel. It's beautiful. I will never break my covenant with you. And then in verse 2, as for you, you shall not make a covenant with the inhabitants of the land. That's the point right there. And boy, did they ever. Not only did they make a covenant, they intermarried, they worshiped their gods, they did all of that stuff. And then you shall tear down their altars. But you have not obeyed me. What is this that you have done? What have you done? God's like, I gave you this covenant, Israel. What have you done? I opened this land up for you. You were going to go in and you were going to take it. I was going to give you this land of milk and honey. And you went in, you left people. And not only did you leave them, but you intermarried with them. You worshiped their gods. You made covenants with them and covenants with their gods. And God's like, guys, this is heartbreaking. What is it that you've done? So then God kind of says, well, here's the new covenant that I have with you. So I also said, I will not drive your enemies out before you. God's like, I'm not going to drive them away now. You know, when I called you into Canaan, I said, I will go with you and before you, and I will drive your enemies out. But now God's like, hey, I'm not going to do that. But instead, they will be like thorns in your sides, and their gods will be a snare to you. So this is the mess that Israel's created for themselves here. And so after this, Joshua dies, and here comes probably one of the saddest verses in the Bible, you know, for me. But Joshua dies, and all the people are gathered together. And as they gather together, we read in verse 10, it says, and all that generation also were gathered to their fathers. But then here's one of the saddest verses in the Bible to me. And there arose another generation after them who did not know the Lord or the work that he had done for Israel. So there arose another generation who didn't know God. You know what that means? That means that the generation before them stopped telling them about God, stopped talking about God, stopped worshiping God, stopped praying to God. And now you have Israel that goes from a generation that is saved, a generation that is rescued and redeemed, a generation that is now in the land, in the promised land, but is being obedient or disobedient. And now you have a generation that doesn't even know God. You know, and this kind of harks on a principle that I love so much because I feel so convicted about it. And it's that what is optional for one generation becomes unnecessary to the next. So in Israel, if it's optional to obey God's covenant to one generation, then the next generation that comes up, it's unnecessary for them to. They deem it unnecessary, and that's how you get a generation that's far from God and that doesn't even know God. You know, if going to church is optional for one generation, the next generation will see it as unnecessary at all. And it works the same way in our culture. It's the exact same way. How do we get a generation that's far from God? Well, because the generation before made God optional or made church optional. And then we have a broken world because we have generations that are far from God. And now we've got to try and turn those people back and bring them back to church. You know, the best thing that you can do to set up the generation coming after you, your kids, is to just, on Sundays, we are going to church. You know, on top of teaching morals and all this stuff. So anyway, that's the position that Israel has now found itself in. All right. And now what we're going to see play out in the life of Israel is Israel develops a pattern here. There we go. Let's get it? Pattern. A checkered pattern, because Israel's checkered path. This is the last one, I promise. From here on out, this message is just normal. But Israel develops a pattern with God. And I'll show you what this actual pattern is right here. So there's 3 steps here to this pattern. The first thing that Israel does is they turn away from God to serve the Canaanite gods. All right, so they turn away from God, they serve the Canaanite gods. Then God delivers the people into the hands of the enemies, and they oppress Israel. So Israel doesn't worship God, turns to the Canaanite gods. Then God delivers them to their enemies. And then Israel cries out in distress. And this pattern repeats over and over and over and over again. And I think that if you ever wonder, can God still forgive you? Can God still use you? Can God still love you? Is God done with me or is God not done with me? Well, Israel and God and this pattern should bring us actually a little bit of comfort, okay? And the comfort in this is that God doesn't just leave it. Israel cries out in distress. And this is where we get Judges and where we get the book of Judges, because God, He hears their cries. He over and over and over and over again hears their cries. Just like He over and over and over again will hear yours. Did you mess up and sin? God will hear. God still does not give up on you. He will still hear your cry out to Him. I mean, this is a people group that God freed from Egypt, brought them into the promised land of milk and honey, and then they turned around and worshiped other gods. I would think that when Israel cried out in distress, God would have just been like, fresh start, just smeared, Israel under His footprint and started fresh somewhere else, but He didn't. So God gives them judges, and this is the last part of the cycle. God raises up a judge to deliver them. But after the judge dies, watch, these guys are not very smart or faithful. Israel, they relapse and become even more corrupt than they were before. That's the pattern. And then after they become corrupted and even more, then God turns them back over to somebody and they oppress them. And then Israel cries out, and then another judge gets raised up. So if you're new to the Bible, there's a book in the beginning that's called Judges. And it's called Judges because it's about how Israel got their judges. And so now you know how Israel came into having judges over them because of this pattern. Because God didn't give up on them. Because God wasn't going to leave them. God wasn't going to abandon them. And what God's done for them, He also does for us. So I want to look at a couple of the judges here. The first judge that we see in the Bible, his name is Othniel. And you find him in Judges 3. But after 8 years of oppression under Cushan, you can say that, of Mesopotamia, Othniel delivers them, and they have 40 years of rest. So they've been oppressed for 8 years. They cry out to God. He comes in and delivers them, and then they have 40 years where everything is okay in the land. But it doesn't stay that way. The next judge that you have is you've got Ehud. Now, there's 12 of these in total. We're not going to go through, but just this one and a couple more. This guy is amazing. Ehud is actually an assassin. All right, his story is incredible. After 18 years of oppression under Eglon, king of Moab, Ehud delivers them, and they have 80 years of rest. You know how he does this? Anyone ever play Assassin's Creed? Yeah, we got a couple people in here. That's kind of the way that Ehud does it. If you don't get that reference, then I'm sorry. So that's the way that Ehud does. So he's like an assassin. So what he does is he's going to go to the king and he's going to present to him a sword and a gift. And so Ehud goes to this Eglon, the king of Moab, and they have a meeting, and then the meeting finishes, and then he's like, I got to go back in. Hold on a second. Let me tell him one more thing. But then he wants to get him alone in private, and he's like, hey, king, you and me, can we meet, in your chambers in private there? And the king's like, yeah, okay, we can do that. And so then Ehud so he's left-handed. So it's the only time I can think of now that the Bible references a left-handed person in this way. So if you're right-handed, you would wear your sword on your left. All right, Ehud is left-handed, so he has a hidden sword on his right. And so Ehud gets the king alone, and he pulls his hidden sword and he stabs him. But the Bible says that this guy was so obese, so fat and obese, and Ehud's sword was so sharp that when he stabbed him, not just the blade went in, but the whole thing, just the hilt of the handle part, it disappeared. It just, went in there. Now, here's the funny part, because that's not, Hey, this is light. We're having a light Sunday here. The funny part to this is Ehud locks the door and he walks out. And then the king's men come and they try and go in and the door's locked. And they think that the king is using the bathroom. They're like, oh, this guy must be on the toilet. He's locked the door. Meanwhile, the king's dead. And they stand outside the door forever. And the Bible says they stand outside until they get embarrassed. And they're like, this guy, king must really have some runny tummy going on in there. But eventually they break the door down and they go in and they find that the king is dead. I just think, yes, the Bible puts that story in there that Ehud assassinates him, locks him in the place, and the king's guards are too embarrassed to check on him because they think that he's going number 2. So anyway, that's Ehud. Simultaneously at the same time here, you've got a guy named Shamgar. And Shamgar currently, he was sort of working concurrently to Ehud, but in a different place. He struck down 600 Philistines with an ox goad. If you think Philistines, think David and Goliath. Goliath the Philistine, okay? An ox goad, that's a sharp, pointy stick. It's what farmers or shepherds use to, push people, or not people, but push oxes where they wanted them to go. And so he 600 people with a pointed stick, I would say if you go outside after the service and you take a stick and you hit a tree 600 times, see how sore your arm is, And this dude takes 600 people down. So anyway, that's an amazing judge right there. But that brings us to where we're going to be talking today, the judge that we're going to focus on here. So after this happens, Israel, they still rebel. And they still worship the other gods. They still fall out of favor with God, just repeating the same pattern. And so God raises up 2 people, Jabin and Sisera. Now, Jabin was king of Canaan, and Sisera was the commander of Jabin's army. And they were going to cruelly oppress Israel for 20 years. And so they are pressing down. Well, I'm going to show you a map in a minute, but they're pressing down from the north, and Israel is being cruelly oppressed for 20 years. And what comes next in the pattern? A judge, because God's oppressed them. So now it's time for step 4 for a judge. And here we have the first female, or the only female judge of the 12, and her name is Deborah. And Deborah was pretty unique because Deborah was like, she was actually practicing law as a judge. So she was actively ruling over people in Israel. So they would come to the palm of Deborah, which sounds like something in a video game. They would come to the palm of Deborah, and Deborah would hear their story or hear their need, and then Deborah would make a ruling on the situation. So she was like an acting judge. And so Deborah sees that Israel's oppressed, and she hears from God. And so Deborah says, okay, we're going to free Israel here. This woman is an amazing woman. And so Deborah hears from God, and then this is what Deborah does. In Judges 4:6, Deborah, now she sent word and summoned Barak, the son of Abinoam, from Kadesh Naphtali, and said to him, behold, the Lord, the God of Israel, has come. Go and march to Mount Tabor and take with you 10,000 men of war from the tribes of Naphtali and Zebulun. So let me just break this down for you. Here's the players, in case you've forgotten. You've got Israel, God's people, but they're a mess, right? Then you have the people that are going to oppress Israel, which is Jabin, the king of the Canaanites, so the big king, and then he has a military commander, Sisera. So you have Israel being oppressed by Jabin and Sisera. The judge is Deborah, and she also has a commander of the military. His name is Barak. So you're going to see a king and a commander of a military for the bad guys, and then you've got the good guys, which is Deborah and Barak. And they're going to go head to head with each other here. And so Deborah hears from God and tells Barak, hey, I'm calling you on behalf of God. You're going to gather your army. You're going to gather your military. Now, Barak, I don't know why he did this, but Barak says to her, I will only, I don't know if he was like my queen or my princess or what, I don't know, but he says, I will only go if you come with me. You know, maybe they had a crush on each other. Maybe he's like, no, I can't live life without you. I need you have to come with me, you know. And Deborah's like, okay, you know what? Here, once again, you have an Israelite not doing what God said all the way. Deborah said, God said, Barak, for you to go and do this. And instead of him saying, I'll do it, he said, well, I'll only do it if. And so Deborah ends up coming. She does end up going with him. But because of that, she tells Barak, God has said that Sisera will not be delivered into your hands, but into the hands of a woman, you know. And so Barak's like, okay, well, maybe that's Deborah there. So anyway, let me show you their strategy going into battle here. So here we have like a little map right here, but I'm going to explain this to you. So these two tribes, Zebulun and Naphtali, this is like where Deborah tells Barak to go gather the 10,000 men. And they're going to come from these two tribes, because up here at this red dot in Hazor, this is where the king of the Canaanites is putting pressure. So these two tribes, Zebulun and Naphtali, are feeling the pressure of opposition. So they're motivated to fight. So Deborah says, Barak, go gather these men and come down here to Kadesh. And when you get down here to Kadesh, what I'm going to do is I'm going to leak some information to Sisera. And Sisera is the bad guy, the bad military guy. And Sisera is commanding the army. He's going to come from this river basin here. Here's why. Okay, Sisera has 900 chariots. These are like tanks, the equivalent of tanks of the time. And these 900 chariots means that they were like a technologically advanced powerhouse. And so Sisera, how are you going to move 900 chariots? You're not going to move them over the mountains, are you? No, absolutely not. You're actually going to need flat ground to do that. Well, this river basin is flat ground. So Sisera is over here so that he can move his 900 chariots. But Deborah, I don't know if she had a weather app on her phone or what she had going on, but Deborah is pretty smart here. And she said, I'm going to lure Sisera down here thinking that he's going to get you, Barak. But when he gets down here, you're going to go up to a mountain called Mount Tabor, which is like really just a giant hill. So what's happened is Sisera's coming and he's on his way, and the 10,000 men with Barak come and they say, no, boo-boo, you can't get me, right? And they taunt Sisera's military, and then they turn around and they run and they get on top of this hill and they stand up there and watch, and here comes Sisera, and as Sisera comes in, it rains and the river floods and all 900 chariots get stuck in the mud. And then Deborah, she lets out this loud cry, and she says in verse 14, Deborah lets out this cry, and she tells Barak, arise, for this is the day when the Lord has given Sisera into your hand. She's like, now, go. It's going to happen now. And Barak, he says, okay, you know. And so Barak went down from the mountain of Tabor with 10,000 men following him. So they stormed down this hill. And Sisera is at the bottom of it, stuck in the mud with 900 chariots and the rest of his military, and they are absolutely befuddled. And so in verse 15, and the Lord routed Sisera. That's the flood. We read about it in chapter 5, but God brought a flood in. I mean, how unlikely is that, you know? God brings a flood in, gets Sisera stuck in the mud, and all his chariots, and confused all of his army with the edge of the sword before Barak. They killed everybody. They annihilated everybody. But Sisera, the coward, I don't even want him to be, he deserves to, even today, still be called a coward. He abandoned his military, his army. Sisera dismounted from his chariot and he fled away on foot. But Barak and the Israelites, they are like, we're doing this the way God told us to, and we're going to annihilate everybody. And so Barak pursues the chariots and the army to Harosheth, and the entire army of Sisera fell by the sword. Not even one man was left. And I mean, that's amazing. God used weather and flooded a valley to deliver these people into their hands. That's incredible. But it gets even more incredible than that. So what do we do about this Sisera guy? Sisera fled on foot. And I actually looked this up. I spent too much time doing this. Did you know that he fled what they estimate would be about 15 kilometers? Okay. Do you know how, who ran 15 kilometers recently? You know? Okay. Nobody, exactly. If you've ever done some long distance running, done a 10K, 15K, you know it's hard, it's a lot, but you settle in, you pace yourself, you have water on you, you have snacks, you've got things, you know, kind of all over, you know, to get you through to the end of the run. Well, Sisera is not running like that. You know how people run in scary movies when they're being chased, where their arms are like, you know, flailing around and they're tripping, they're falling on logs and on the rivers. So Sisera, I would imagine, does that for 15 kilometers. And he sees this beacon of hope and peace in the distance, and it's a tent. And Sisera's like, I think I know whose tent that is. And I think I know that that's a safe place for me. And I can imagine him being like, just taking a deep breath and being like, I think I found a safe place, because Barak is chasing him. And he knows if he gets caught, he's dead. So Sisera flees on foot, and he goes to the tent of Jael, the wife of Heber the Kenite. Now this is important because this Heber and the Kenite, he had a peaceful relationship with Jabin, the king of the Canaanites. And so Sisera is like, this guy has peace with our people. I'm going to go to this tent, to the tent of Jael. I'm going to be received. I'm going to be basically rescued. But the guy is tired. But Jael, who we're going to see, she's got a bit of a secret for Sisera. He thinks he's coming in to be rescued and saved. But instead, he's coming in and he's going to be introduced to Jael's deadly hospitality. Right? Sounds dun dun dun. You know? And Jael, with her kindness that kills. We're going to see this right here. You know, she's not just kind, but it's the kindness that kills. And I think when I was writing this sermon, in my head, this sounded way more like, boo, 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 you know, like a Jael, deadly, you know. But anyway, so Jael, this is Jael. And the reason that hospitality is such a big deal here is because it was very normal when someone came into your tented camp, someone comes to your home, you would give them tea, you would give them water, you would give them food, and you would give them lodging and shelter. Now also, it would be customary for the man of the home or the tent to greet the visitor first, for Jael to have not been the one to do that. But for whatever reason, Jael greets him first and brings him in, and then she is showing the hospitality and the kindness that Sisera has expected. But it doesn't go all the way like that. So Sisera comes in and he says, Jael, I'm so thirsty. Can you give me some water? And Jael says, no, it's okay, chill. And she lays him down and she covers him with a rug. And Sisera's been running 15K, and then before that, who knows how long he marched. He's tired. The guy's exhausted. He's had nothing to eat. So Jael gives him, instead of giving him water, she opens a skin of milk and gives him milk. Now that's significant because Sisera is like, okay, she really cares about me because she gave me milk. It's like going in and asking somebody for a snack and they give you a whole meal. And you're like, this is even better. Thank you very much. So when she gave him milk through this hospitality, Sisera would have let his guard drop. He would have been like, oh, okay. She brought the good stuff. I'm under a rug. I'm in a tent. I'm hidden. I've got a skin of milk. And then just like a baby who drinks a bottle in the sun in the afternoon, what do? They black out. They're gone. And Sisera does that. He drinks and then poof, he's asleep. And then this is where Jael comes in. So before he goes to sleep, he tells her in verse 20, he said to her, stand at the door of the tent, and if any man comes and asks you, is there anyone here? Tell him that, hey, no one's here. I put this in here because these are Sisera's last words. So after Sisera says this, he goes to sleep. But Jael, we see in verse 21, Jael, Heber's wife, took a tent peg and a hammer. Isn't it crazy? Remember this? I can't believe that's in the Bible. Okay, right? I see some of your faces as you're reading ahead. Took a tent peg and a hammer in her hand and came up quietly to him, drove the peg through his temple, and it went through into the ground, for he was sound asleep and exhausted, and so he died. Jael drove a tent peg, which would have been a wooden, sharp-pointed peg about this long with a big mallet, just ding, and into the ground, pegged him to the ground. And everyone say, I can't believe that's in the Bible, right? Because it is. It's like astonishing that it's in there. But when Jael does this, after she does this, Barak finally shows up and Barak's looking for her. Barak is looking for Sisera. And Jael says, I think I know who you're looking for here. And she brings him into the tent. And I can't imagine Barak's face when he walked into the tent. It's like, okay, somebody went a bit overboard here, But he finds Sisera, and then what ends up happening because of what Jael did, the people of Israel are so motivated and so empowered and so, feeling so like equipped to do this now. They go after not only all of Sisera's army is dead, they go after Jabin, the king of the Canaanites, and they spend weeks and months rooting them out until every single one of them is dead. And Israel completely conquers the Canaanites. God could have worked this out any way that he wanted to, but he used an unlikely person and unlikely tools in order to do that. After this happens, in chapter 5, there's actually like a song that's written for this situation, where Deborah and Barak write a song together. And in this song here, they call Jael the most blessed of women is Jael, the wife of Heber the Kenite. Most blessed is she of women in the tent. So she's forever known as a most blessed woman. And as this song continues here, I just want to read to you what Barak and Deborah say about Jael. Sisera asked for water and she gave him milk. She brought him curds in a magnificent bowl. She reached out her left hand for the tent peg and her right hand for the workman's hammer. Then she struck Sisera, she smashed his head, she shattered and pierced his temple. This is in your Bible, all right? This is in our Bible. But then about Sisera, he bowed, he fell, he lay still at her feet. At her feet he bowed, he fell, and when he bowed there, he fell dead. And thus ends the story of Sisera's life. Jael was an unlikely person with unlikely tools. And again, like I said in the beginning, how many of us see ourselves as the unlikely people with unlikely tools? I'm not the person that's going to be able to conquer fear in my family or fear in my life. Who am I? What do I know how to do? Let me just confess something to you. Every Sunday, I wonder what a real pastor would do at church home. But you know what? I have found so much comfort in considering myself as an unlikely person with an unlikely tool set, because that means it has to be God, because it can't be me. And I think all of us are in situations in our lives where it has to be God. It can't be you. Because you're too unlikely and you don't have the tools for it. But you don't need a different set of tools than what you have. And you don't need to be a different person than who you are. See, Jael was unqualified for battle, but she was more than qualified to set up a tent. Jael didn't know how to do anything outside of setting up these tents. They were nomadic. So the one thing that she was good at doing was set up and take down of that tent. That meant that when she picked up a hammer and a tent peg, she knew how to use it. And God routed Sisera to her tent where she used what she knew to do God's will. Jael was also, her family had broken away from their tribe and they were living way far away from the rest of them. So she was isolated and she was unqualified for war and for battle. But she was perfectly qualified to be used by God. And that's us. You don't need to be any different than what you are. Accept what you're good at. Accept what you know how to do. Accept what your gifts and your talents are for what they are. And lean into them, because you don't have to be qualified for the battle you think you need to fight. You just need to use the tools that God has given you. So I want to leave you with this encouragement that you are perfectly equipped and perfectly qualified to be used by God exactly as you are. You are enough to conquer fear. You are enough to conquer anxiety and shame. You are more than enough to help those that are around you and to help yourself. You are enough to be strong when you feel weak. And the reason that you're enough exactly in just the way that you are is because God loves you exactly in just the way that you are. And God sent His Son to die on the cross for you. And God cares about you deeply, and God gives you everything that you would need. So just exactly the way you are is what perfectly qualifies you to be used by God. Let me pray for us and close this.